So, Christopher Dale Goodwin, when you first watched an Apollo launch as a child, what did you imagine the future would be when you became a man? Something I just finished writing about, actually. Uh, I I saw Apollo 13 with my own eyes. I was in New York City for Apollo 11. Actually, I was in Pennsylvania for Apollo 11. We were visiting the States from Bermuda. We were in New York during the landing, but the launch, I was in my cousin's, staying with my cousins who I loved, and they had a color TV, which is a big novelty for those of us living in Bermuda where there was no color television broadcast. And if you grew up in the early days of color TV, you know that it's the job of the eldest son to be the engineer in charge of not only color brightness but also tint control, which I played with just endlessly. Anyway, I remember as color TV, it was great. It was one of those big wooden console kind of things. It's just this enormous table with a screen, probably, bloody microphone, like this big maybe. And I remember I got the worst splinter in my life I've ever received. I got off of that thing, but I digress. Okay, so what was it like? There is a. So I saw 11 in Pennsylvania. I saw 12 in Bermuda. 13 I saw live, and we were a good long way away. I mean, when we finally found a place where we could park, I was really kind of shocked at how far away we were. We just couldn't get any closer. And actually, this question tees up something that's actually really important. I'll get to in a minute. So you're looking across like inland waterway, and there's mangrove trees and stuff. We're surrounded by all kinds of people, and we're there for hours in the baking hot sun, and it's just nasty. And then across the way, you can see the VAB, the Vehicle Assembly Building, is just this giant cube out there. And you can see the Saturn V, although, again, at the distance we were, it didn't look, super, super big. So we're getting the countdown on the radio, and we get the, T minus 10, 9, 8, 7, ignition sequence start. So it's 7 seconds. I want to say T minus 7 seconds. They light the engines. And immediately we could see the steam coming out from the water suppression system. And then when it lifted off, I had this experience watching a number of rocket launches, a couple shuttle launches. When that thing came off the pad, it's astonishing how bright the exhaust is. Even in the middle of a summer day in Florida, it's like, wow, that is really bright. And I want to say the thing was, I don't know, 30 degrees in the air before we I almost had heard the sound, but even at the distance we were, you just felt it. It was like boom. I remember when I first saw a shuttle launch, I thought, man, that looks precarious. That thing's just about to fall off. But after getting used to shuttle launches, watching a Saturn V launch seems like, man, that thing is going to tip over. I mean, it's just how can it go straight up? But it's amazing. There's a picture out there which I just highly recommend. It is a multi-panel photograph collection of every one of the Saturn V's lifting off at the same moment next to each other. So you see every one of them that ever flew. And never had a failure on any of them. I think Apollo 12 lost one engine on the way to orbit, but that's it. I mean, it's just perfect. And to see, I don't know how many there were. I want to say it was maybe 12 or something like that, maybe somewhere around there. To see them all side by side like that is just magnificent. But up it went, and that little vapor trail it left, not like the big heavy clouds on the SRBs on the shuttle, just going. I remember seeing a documentary, I think it was called In the Shadow of the Moon, not too long ago, where they talked to the Apollo astronauts who were still surviving back then. And they asked one of them about, I think it might have been on Apollo 12. It was probably Pete Conrad, I guess, or Bean. It was almost certainly Conrad. So he loses the engine, and apparently the guidance got kind of, squirrely. And somebody asked him, well, what were you going to do if you lost the guidance on takeoff? And like I said, I think it was Conrad, but I remember the quote. I'll never forget it. He said, "I was just going to reach down there, grab that joystick, and fly that son of a bitch into orbit." Can you imagine controlling that thing with a joystick? But they could. They had the ability to do the thrust vectoring. I'm going to fly that son of a bitch into orbit, and he would have too, by God. But the question wasn't what's it like to watch an Apollo launch. The question was, what did I imagine the future would be like? Well, my studio here is a sort of a museum of the lost future. Directly in front of me, behind the camera, I have 6 acrylic paintings. They're about that big and about that wide. They're backlit with LEDs, all very spacey looking, and they're 6 illustrations from Sid Mead, who was a concept car designer for, I'll say for Ford, but I'm not sure. But anyway, in the early '60s, he did these unbelievable pieces of artwork, and I'm looking at them now, and all of these cars just look like spaceships, and he loved colors, his brilliant, pinks and cyans and all of it, and everybody is happy, and everything works, and everything is clean, and I've got a bunch of them back on that wall too, and Sid Mead. That was the future I was sure I was going to get. But anyway, I did not. I've been horribly disappointed, needless to say, like so many. Oh, come on, I got to get this thing fixed. Horribly disappointed with the progress in space since the end of the Apollo program. I mean, just heartbroken. But that situation, excuse me, wasn't a yawn, it just looked like one. I've been feeling better since I saw the SpaceX boosters coming back to land. That looked like actual progress to me. But after Apollo, they threw Skylab together because they had a spare booster or two. And they needed something to stay in business until the shuttle was ready in 1980. So they had the middle 70s were the Apollo-Soyuz test flight and the Skylab mission with the 3 different crews. And I thought, okay, Skylab, that's cool, it's a space station. And then the shuttle came, and I thought, now we're serious, now we're going to get going. And then the shuttle just went up and came back down again. I had a dream right after the first launch. I had a nightmare. I was walking along a beach in Florida. It was nighttime, and I was so into the space shuttle and stuff, and I had this nightmare about one of the shuttles going up and exploding on the way up, and then another one disintegrating on the way down. That's about the only thing I can ever claim any kind of, like, I'm not saying it was prophetic. I mean, it's like you watch that, look at that vehicle. These are things that can go wrong and go wrong badly. But anyway, we just kept for, starting in 80 and until 2000 and, what was it, 8 or 9? Could it have been, or later? I don't remember how long it's been since the shuttle ended. But anyway, the whole space shuttle period, was just 30 years of doing nothing in terms of, learning new stuff. And watching Challenger and Columbia, and then just the heartbreak of watching them, and then learning about how not only preventable but just real negligent NASA was in both of those cases. In the case of Challenger, there literally were engineers running around with their hair on fire screaming, "You can't launch this vehicle. If you launch this vehicle, it's going to explode." Um, and they thanks 2011. So that was Challenger, and they were under some pressure. They didn't want to be delayed. They had the first teacher in space and all of that stuff, and we paid for that one. And we paid for it because we thought, well, it didn't go wrong last time, so chances are it won't go wrong again. There were burn-throughs on the solid rocket boosters many, many flights prior to the loss of Challenger. Likewise, prior to the loss of Columbia, when they switched to the different kind of environmentally friendly foam, because God knows there's so many space shuttles being built on an industrial scale and external tanks being foamed. But anyway, this newer foam didn't stick as well and tended to generate more ice, so ice was hitting the orbiter frequently before Columbia, and they just thought, well, doesn't seem to be doing any damage. So it did, and when they first started investigating the Columbia accident, they were convinced that it could not have been the ice. The little bit it wasn't actually ice; it was a piece of foam. They thought there's no way that could do it, and they fired the foam against the leading edge wing of the shuttle, and it just bounced right off. And see, it couldn't have been that, absolutely. And finally, some engineers said, "Now, why don't you try shooting the foam at the leading edge wing in the partial vacuum, because this happened at relatively high altitude, and next thing you know, boom, it just smashes the leading edge. Okay, well, now we know. But they should have known both of those things. It was wishful thinking in both cases. So the world I was expecting, Chris, was a much more technologically advanced place, and it was certainly a more morally advanced place. It was a future that where everything worked, and where we were making genuine progress, and we didn't have to worry about the social justice stuff, because social justice was taking care of itself pretty well. I mean, I'm looking at these Sid Mead pictures. There are black guys there, couples getting out of the cars, and everybody's clean cut, and no one's filthy, and no one's rolling in the mud doing drugs. It's just, and it's not the future of Alien or Aliens, or it's not that dark, metallic, mass-produced, steel, ugly, underlit, dripping with water, fans slowly turning. It was just elegant, beautiful, magnificently engineered. Looked like this is what the 21st century is going to look like. It's going to look like this. And turns out it didn't. I still am amazed in terms of what I was thinking the future would be like. I'm still amazed that, not amazed that I didn't see it, but I'm amazed that nobody saw the internet coming. Nobody. I do not remember a single science fiction novel or any kind of movies or discussions that even got close to the idea of what the internet became. And that's kind of startling when you think about it. So, now with the internet, I can go back and watch. I can watch the replay of the Apollo 11 landing, and watch Wally Schirra and Walter Cronkite tearing up, and I can see the animation that I can remember seeing, because I just finished writing a little bit about this. When Apollo 11 landed on the moon, I was in New York, but I wasn't really in New York, and I wasn't at the moon either. My entire consciousness during that entire descent was me and the rest of the planet. Our minds and hearts were watching this animated cartoon Lem coming down like a Disney cartoon. And every time they'd cut back to it, they would show it at a little bit of a steeper angle, and it was CBS animation, and you're busy watching this thing. Getting green in here, or am I getting green in here? I don't know. It's kind of a little warm these lights up a bit. And that's where we were. We were all watching this cartoon because there was no video coming back from the mission, not on the descent. And so we're watching this cartoon, and one thing I didn't realize until I actually got back and looked at it again, I remember something seeming a little wrong, but I didn't realize what it was. If you go back and look at it, just search for CBS News coverage Apollo 11. They had these animations, and they had timed the animations so that their animated lunar module would land at the moment that Apollo 11 was scheduled to touch down on the moon. So we're watching this coverage, and we see the LEM is coming down, and then it's on the moon, and then you go to a wider shot, and there's like a model of the LEM sitting on the moon. And you're thinking, yay. But the audio that's coming down from the mission, just on the animation, at the point on the animation where the LEM touches the ground, Mission Control says 60 seconds. And then there's more of buzz, 30 down, four to the right, four to the. He's just calling out this kind of fine information, picking up little dust, and it took, I want to say, it took about 40 seconds for the reality of it to catch up to the animation. In other words, the animation told us that man is safely on the moon 40 seconds before the thing landed, and that's because if the thing had landed on time, it would have landed in a boulder field, and that would have been the end of Apollo 11. Neil had taken over automatic control and hand flew the LEM way past their intended touchdown point, and he's still in the air, so to speak, still above the surface. And then Mission Control calls out 30 seconds of fuel. And the landing, if you've ever seen the LEM in orbit before it goes down, you'll notice at the bottom of the foot pads have these long, thin, spindly probes. They're long and thin like poles, and they're covered in the same kind of reflective gold as the bottom stage of the LEM is. And these are the contact sensors. So there's these it's like the LEM lands on toothpicks, and when one of them touches the ground, they get a contact light in the cockpit. And then as soon as they see that contact light, the plan is to, rather than just fly the thing down and then bounce around a little bit, once the contact light, they see it, they just cut the engine, and the LEM falls the final 3 or 4 feet in 1/6 gravity. Usually not too bad, but one mission, I think it was Apollo 12, they came down hard. They just chatter their teeth, kind of thing. Anyway, it was, we were watching this animation, and they're saying they're on the moon, and we're looking at a picture of the LEM on the moon with the foreground rocks and everything, and these guys are still up there fighting this mission out. It's interesting, too, that we found out that Apollo 11 was on the moon, not from Apollo 11. If you look at the transcript and listen to it, you'll find out that the first indication that they are actually on the moon is when Houston says, we're showing you down, or something like that. And everybody says that the first word spoken from the moon is Houston, which is a cool thing to say, because Houston Tranquility Base, here the Eagle has landed. But having just researched this, I suspect that once the thing was on the surface, so it's contact light. Then Aldrin says ACA out of detent. Armstrong says out of detent. So I think the first word actually issued from the surface of the moon was the acronym ACA. That's the first actual transmission. ACA out of detent. Armstrong confirms out of detent. Aldrin says mode control both auto. Descent engine command override off. Engine arm off. 413 is in. And then Houston says we copy you down, Eagle. And then There's a pause, and Armstrong says, Houston, Tranquility Base, here the Eagle has landed. There is a great video of the not only the Apollo 11 out the window descent, but somebody put together a montage of all 6 landings, back-timed so that they all touched down at the exact same instant. And it is incredible to watch. It's the exact same procedure as a pitch-over procedure and all of this stuff. But nobody got as nearly as close as Armstrong and Aldrin. They were down to probably 14, 15 seconds of fuel, something like that. I remember on Apollo 12, Conrad, it was Bean. Bean was just going nuts. He was like, "Well, man, you're just kicking its ass. We get tons of fuel." It's kind of refreshing. Anyway, so the future that I was expecting looked a lot more technologically advanced, Christopher, and it was a lot cleaner. And we all had jetpacks. We would have had jetpacks and video phones. That was a big part of it. Although I realize we have the video phones now. We're kind of using one right now. And I certainly did not foresee the social trouble, and I did not foresee the pushback against things like technology, pushback against nuclear power. I thought, we'd have irrigated deserts with nuclear power, and there's no reason why we shouldn't. So it is kind of the lost future for people like me. There was a future that we were expecting to get, and certainly seemed better than the one we got. Anyway.